So I'm going to remove the oil pan, clean it all up on the inside, and replace the gasket on the oil sump pickup flange. But before I do that, I want to check if any of the pan bolts have become stripped. So I use an inch-pound, not foot-pound, wrench and set it to 78 inch-pounds, and then I just go around to check and see if all the bolts will hold. Good, 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 good. Okay, great. No stripped threads. If there were, I would have to put a helicoil insert in to repair it, but I don't have to do that. So I've removed most of the bolts, and I left a couple on the top just to hang this oil pan off of. And if we're lucky, it'll just separate right off the gasket. Sometimes it'll stay stuck, and you'll have to use a little rubber mallet on the edges to knock it free. But this one's coming off, and there it is. Fair amount of junk in the bottom, but first visual inspection doesn't show any big chunks of anything like metal or gaskets, so that's a good thing. Now this is the oil pump suction, and I'm going to remove that and replace the gasket, and I'm also going to clean out this whole cavity, get rid of any garbage that's in there. So I have a large flat glass plate, and this is the oil pan which I've had vapor blasted, so it looks pretty good. I got rid of all the orange paint. I'm going to use a 2,000th feeler and check for whether the mating surface on the bottom is flat. So as I start back here, it won't slide under, and then right about here, as I push down, it slides all the way under. And then right about here, it's flat again. Now if I turn it around and check the other side, that's all good. Yeah, it's all pretty good along this edge. Now right in here, it's a little bit loose. Yeah, a little, and right there it's all pretty good. And then it starts to get loose again. So what I'm going to do is put some sandpaper, wet dry paper, on this glass plate and sand down the mating surface so it's dead flat. And that way when I put the gasket on, it'll seal tight and I won't have any oil leaks. I have some 400 grit wet dry paper, and I spray it with a little water. And then I'll take the valve cover and I'll sand it on the plate in a figure-8 pattern. And I'll keep doing that until when I measure it, the bottom of the plate is flat all the way around. Okay, I've got it pretty flat, I think. And I'm just checking around the edge. And it's not sliding in. Yep, I believe it's good and flat. So that should seal well when I put the pan gasket on. Now I used some kerosene and a paintbrush and cleaned up the bottom of the engine to get rid of any debris and make it look pretty clean. This is the oil pump suction, and I want to replace a gasket that holds this onto the engine block. Now there's a screen on the front of the suction funnel, and it's held on by a little bail. I just take a screwdriver and just pop that bail out of its notch, and then it comes out. and that's the screen, and that's the wire bail. And then there's 2 bolts here that remove the funnel from the casting on the engine block. So I've loosened up the nuts, the bolts. By the way, they're Loctited, so you need to work on them a little bit. And sometimes you have to wrap on this to make it break free. But this is the mating surface on the funnel, and this is the old gasket, which is kind of brittle. So I'll clean that all off and clean this all up so I can put the new gasket on. To remove the gasket, I use a single-edged razor blade and very carefully get under the gasket and just clean it off the flange here, keeping it at a very shallow angle so I don't gouge the casting. And I'll keep working at it to get the little bits here off, and then I'll clean that up and make sure it's nice and flat and no grunges on it. Now, after I got the gasket off with the single-edge razor, I use a little 600 grit wet dry with a wood block and dressed the flange and also the flange on the suction. And then I used a little bit of brake cleaner and cleaned the flange on both of these. Gets rid of any oil so the gaskets will seal. This is the new gasket, which will go on like that, and no sealer, just the gasket. And then I put a little blue Loctite on the threads for the bolts, so everything's pretty much ready to go. Just kind of thread the bolts through the flange here and catch the gasket, and then lay it up here on the sump. Now notice the flanges, the suction funnel is not symmetric, so the long end goes toward the center here. And if you put it in backwards, of course, the oil pan won't mount. So that'll be your first clue you got it wrong. And then I just snug the bolts up. So I have my inch-pound wrench ready, and we'll just bring them up. Click, 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 click. Okay, then all I have to do is put the screen back on. So I clean the screen up, and I can just slide the bail down until it's in the slot over here. And then up on this, wanted to show you one other thing about the screen. It's bowed out on this side and dished on this side. The bowed out side's what faces you. And that's what puts some pressure on the clip here. Clip fits in a slot, and then I just slide this one down until it drops into the slot, and we're all done. Now I cleaned up the mating surface using a wood block with some 600 grit paper, and then I cleaned it with brake cleaner, and I'm ready to install the pan gasket. And you'll notice the engine block has a little dip here, and so does the gasket. So there's really no way you can put the gasket on backwards. It has to go one way. So that's good. Now, you may remember that this motorcycle came with an orange painted oil pan, which was not the way it came from the factory. I've had this one vapor blasted by Vintage Twins, an outfit in my hometown of Arvada, Colorado. They did a really nice job of bringing it back. And I cleaned this all up with a little 600 grit and a flat block. And of course I showed how I got it dead flat on a glass plate. And then I cleaned it too with some brake cleaner, so there's no oil on it. Now the reason for taking that care on the mating surfaces is because the gasket is got a heat sensitive glue, so it'll stick and seal but it won't do well if there's any oil on the mating surfaces. Now the way I mount it is I put a bolt in each corner and hang the gasket on them, and then put them into the block, and then just catch them so the oil pan can hang off those bolts, and that makes it pretty easy to get the rest of them. Now I'm using stainless steel oil pan bolts, which requires me to put some anti-seize on the threads so they won't gall to the aluminum engine block. But anti-seize is a lubricant, so the spec calls for 72 to 75 inch-pounds. I'm going to put a lower torque on these of only 60 inch-pounds so I don't strip the threads. So I put the bolts in, and then I torque them in 3 stages. 25 inch, not foot, but inch-pounds, 40 inch-pounds, and then 60. And I'm ready to finish up on the 60. Now, when I torque them, I start in the middle and work to the ends, and I go across from each other. And the idea is, because the gasket's so large, I don't want to end up with a pucker in it. So I work my way out from the middle to the ends. Okay, now I'm just going to go around and make sure everybody's still 60. Yep. 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 Okay, oil pan's back on with a new oil pan gasket.